What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Amri Johnson, how you doing, man? Welcome to Living Corporate.
I'm great, man. I just came back from vacation last week. Obviously, when you come back from vacation, it's lots of stuff that you have to comb through before I fly to Washington, D.C. next week. But I can't complain.
Man, we gotta talk about your journey, right? So I'm looking at your Perry, right? Obviously, Morehouse man. You've been at some really prestigious organizations, organizations that I'm familiar with or have done work with or have aspired to do work with. And now you're hanging your own shingle and you're working out in Switzerland. Like, I gotta understand. And I'm gonna tell you, like, I don't like we have, Living Corporate, for those, because everybody listens for the first time, Amri. So, Living Corporate started off really as like just a podcast focused on Black experiences at work. Then we expanded to talk about Black and Brown experiences, then just to marginalized experiences. Then after that, we really started building up other services to coordinate with the media work that we were doing. So now we do brand storytelling, and then we also do, we have an e-learning platform, and then we do data analytics and data transformation to connect employee and customer experience. But despite all of that, on the media side, we don't have a ton of international conversations, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting to me is the fact that, yes, I'm talking to someone that's doing business internationally, but they also have a Black American context, right? So sure. I would just love, I'll give you all the space in the world. I would just love to hear more about your journey, right? From Morehouse to Cook Ross to Novartis to doing your own work. Like, I would love to hear more about it.
No, thanks, Zach. And I'm delighted to be with you. I've had a chance to digest some of your podcasts, and as we were hoping to speak to you. And so it's been delightful to watch a lot of people I have great respect for on your show. So that's been fantastic. I think I'll go before even Cook Ross, because I'm an epidemiologist by training. So my training was in public health. I worked mostly in infectious diseases. So when COVID came, I was like, maybe I was talking to my wife, like, maybe I need to be working. I can't speak German, but I need to be doing something. And she was like, no, you need to just keep doing what you're doing and help raise these kids while we're in the middle of a pandemic. So we didn't go there, but that was my background in public health. And so my lens for what we now call diversity, equity, and inclusion was really, I would say, framed from public health. So I've been more interested in prevention than treatment. I've been more interested in what created the conditions versus the condition itself. I've been more interested in creating something that creates thriving long-term rather than dealing with a problem short-term. So that lens I brought into the work, and I worked in public health for a few years, and then I was such a bad manager that I decided to learn about organizational effectiveness. So I got thrown into being a manager when I was quite young, and everybody in my office at the time was a health department outside of Atlanta, Gwinnett, Rockdale, and Newton counties for those people in the Atlanta metro area. So I was the head director of epidemiology and health promotion. And everybody was older than me. In fact, one woman had a son who was born on the exact same day and the exact same year as me. Wow. So I was working with somebody who was basically my mom. She was a lot like my mom now that I think about it too, but she didn't treat me like my mom treats me, but we had a really great relationship. She was probably one of the most helpful people in my journey. And so I did that, and I was bad at it. They gave me all kinds of resources to get better. I was very fortunate in that regard. And so then I got obsessed with everything related to organization and worked with some friends that did this work, not the DEI work, but more organizational effectiveness work. And that was the entry point into me learning more about all things organizational life, from employee life cycle through what I eventually found out was diversity and inclusion as a corporate function. And so I started a couple job boards, niche job boards, when niche job boards were the thing. I don't know how old you are, but it was,
I'm 35.
All right. So yeah, it was, niche job boards probably weren't that big of a deal by the time you started getting into it, but they were the thing because there was the big monster.com and career builder, and then these niche
Ladder.
Exactly. All those things were there. And so I started a couple niche. One was a southeast. So it was called Georgia Healthworks, and it covered the southeastern region. And then I had another, except I didn't cover Florida, but I covered Alabama, Tennessee, North and South Carolina.
Yes.
And then I started one called Diversity Healthworks that was national. Okay. And so that's when I got into the diversity space, because I was like, I'm doing okay developing this community of practitioners committed to cultural competence and reducing health equity, increasing health equity, reducing disparities. We're getting jobs posted. That was all working, but I needed another revenue stream. And so I started cold calling diversity consulting companies. No idea what they did. I just knew I could sell. And I was like, if you need me to sell something, I can sell it. And so I cold called many. The one that got back to me was Cook Ross. So Leslie Traub was the partner of Howard Ross, the founder. They're also marital partners. And I eventually drove up to Nashville to spend a day with Howard working with a client. And I was like, wow, you get paid to do this. I can do that. I don't know how to do it yet, but I helped them build out a product and became a partner with them. I stayed with them, working with them for about 4 years. And then I went to a conference and I met a recruiter, and Novartis asked me to come and help them start up their DEI efforts. So before it was DEI, we were just talking about diversity and inclusion. And there I had so much space, Zach. Mm-hmm. It's rare that you get to go in and the president, let me tell you a story about Mark Fishman, because this guy is phenomenal on so many levels. But my interview with him, they had already made the decision. So, sometimes when you get in there, they already know, right?
Yeah.
So Mark said, so you want to move to Boston? I was like, first thing in my head, I was like, where is this going? Mark is Jewish, by the way.
Okay.
I was like, where is this going? It's 2009. Obama, I've just come, from the inauguration of Obama and all this, all in both of us. He was a big supporter of Obama. Mm-hmm. He says, Boston is known to be a racist city. And I was like, oh, that's where you're going. Because I wasn't trying to prompt him. I was like,
sure.
I was like, well, Mark, I've been Black my whole life.
A long time.
And I've been able to deal with that tension and complexity. I came from Topeka, Kansas, where my dad integrated public schools.
Wow.
I can do it. But just that question for me was like, yeah, this is the right place. He gave us resources. We build out something that really stands until this day. A lot of the foundational work that the research division of Novartis did, yes, we ended up spreading to the entirety of the organization. And a lot of what we did persists.
Wow.
And it was really always focused on creating the conditions for everybody to thrive, knowing that there were certain groups that needed another boost. And so we didn't focus on the groups, we focused on the boosts and finding the populations where the need was unmet and addressing it, both internally and externally. So that was phenomenal. And, you get into an organization, Novartis is huge. It's not always the same when you move outside of your bubble, because the research division was a bubble. Mark Fishman was well protected by the former CEO. We got to do pretty much whatever we wanted. Mm-hmm. And then the corporate came in and it changed. Now, it wasn't altogether bad. It just was different, and it wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. But I was in a relationship with a woman that also worked at Novartis, and I stayed until I moved here.
Okay.
And so when I moved here, knowing that I was kind of at my place, most of my career has been as an entrepreneur, and I was ready to go back in, and thus creating Inclusion Wins. I wrote Reconstructing Inclusion during that time. My last project, by the way, was a parental leave project for Novartis, and they actually expanded parental leave for all parents to 14 weeks globally. And so for those countries that had more time, already, they increased theirs by 4 weeks. So everybody got a boost.
Yeah.
But I left the organization before it was implemented. So I took my parental leave when my son was born in 2019, and I started writing around a little bit after that, and completed the Reconstructing Inclusion in 21, and decided to start my firm around 2020 before the book was done. And yeah, that's kind of, I'll stop there, because that's the kind of trajectory of how I got to where I am today.
What's so exciting, what's so curious about, as I hear like how you got into the quote unquote DEI space, is your background was not in DEI. Your background was in medicine. It was like you're point, you're an epidemiologist, but then to pivot or to like continue that space or that work, but then like get into like people, but more on the operations side. Right. So there was always I would imagine, you tell me if I'm wrong, there was a measured end and function of and measurable goals that you were seeking to achieve with the work that you were doing. I would imagine also, like, as I think about like engaging and trying to work with other people, that's a differentiator, because you're talking about, yes, it's DEI and it's operational. It's operational in its context, which means it's not going to be as fluffy and right, for lack of a better word.
I like the way you language that. You're spot on. I took this work on as, in public health, you first want to create the conditions to prevent something from happening. Mm-hmm. Secondly, if it occurs, like an outbreak would occur, I would have a TB outbreak, and I had to make sure that I reduced the potential harm for more people. And then I needed to then go back and say, how can we make sure that the people that had TB got treated, and do that in a culturally appropriate way? Because sometimes you had circumstances where somebody had to do directly observed therapy for tuberculosis, and they were the only breadwinner of their family, and they didn't speak English, which happened at least once. I can actually say it was more than that when I was in public health. Those are different circumstances and various channels that you have to address. So you have to deal with what's going on in the public. You have to deal with the individual need, and you have to do all you can to make sure that you leave the situation better than you found it. And so there's trade-offs to that. You have to be mindful of them. And if you're not mindful of them, it can cause harm. And I saw that in a lot of things in public health, and I took that into the work that I do today.
It's also interesting because, like, to your point around, like, even like carrying that forward, like the principles of public health into like, hey, we're managing conditions. We're trying to make sure the environment, so much of what I have seen, right? So like, context again, for those who might be the first time, like my background, change management consultant. So worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Accenture, Capgemini, was an HR business partner in pharma and in oil and gas, energy sector. And then also did some DEI and go-to-market strategy work within tech. Mm-hmm. And so what I often have seen and continue to see, a lot of DEI is really symptoms focused, right?
Absolutely.
So it's very much like, oh, this is a cold, and what is the flu, and what are germs, and what are and why is hot water good for cleaning your body, right? And I'm not saying there isn't space for that type of information. However, if all we're doing is talking about the symptoms or like the definitions of and really like ideas and theoretical frames, then we don't really get into the work of prevention and culture shaping and landscape shaping.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because as I hear how you got into the work, and I'm kind of seeing like where and like truly, I hope, Amri, like what we're getting out of, I feel like we're going to get back to that, like more in truth. What do you think about that?
No, Zach, I don't think we have a choice. I think what's happening now with the so-called backlash against DEI is a market correction. Mm-hmm. And so, like, if somebody says something silly about DEI, what is it? Who am I to react to silliness? I'm not going to spend all my energy on that. But what we've done in the social sphere is spend a bunch of energy trying to defend DEI. If you don't want to do DEI, which for a lot of people is hiring brown and black people that aren't qualified, that's what a lot of people think DEI is. If you want to do that, or you think that's what DEI is, you go ahead and think that. I'm not going to argue with you, because it's not going to help. If that's what you think it is, I'll let you think that. And if you're open to talking about what it is and the potential for organizational incessant transformation, because it's not a one-time transformation. Sometimes we think about transformation as if it has a full stop, and it does not, right? Mm-hmm. And so if it's not a part of your organizational makeup, it's really just a set of principles. And if those principles aren't there, sure, don't do them. Fine. Go for it. Deal with the consequences and the trade-offs of not doing it well, right?
Right.
And I don't care what you call it. Just be principle-centered in how you address the differences and similarities, and not just the people ones, but the departmental ones, the business ones, all of those diversities.
Yes.
Don't learn capacity and build skills to deal with it. Fine. I'm fine with that. But people that I'm working with, they're going to do that. And if they're competing with you, you'll see the distinction over time. So I think we have to go back to what you're saying, because that's the only thing that really works. Like a lot of stuff we've done, just, it hasn't done what we hoped it would do.
It hasn't done what we hoped it to do, and it also hasn't done what it's sold to do.
You said it, not me.
It's interesting. To your point about just not even going back and forth. Some of it might be. So I said I'm 35. I believe that you're a little bit older than I am.
A little bit,
but I think some of it is maybe because of, again, like, I know you went to Morehouse. I was born in Rome, Georgia. My people are from Mississippi. Some of it is cultural. Some of it might be the fact that I was raised by baby boomers. My parents are 60 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But and so I think it might be just like a perspective and cultural thing. But I think some of it also is just an entrepreneurial thing. So like when I see people like shaking their fists on DEI, the last thing I'm trying to do is jump on LinkedIn and write a 5-page paragraph story about why we need to fight for DEI. And I'm not, to be clear, this is not shade to nobody who choose to use their time that way.
Sure.
It's just like entrepreneur to entrepreneur. You yelling about DEI does not get me paid. So, and me going back and forth with you about it, especially like we're arguing about it, I'm going to find there's people out there that believe in driving effective and fair employee experience, who are interested in investing in understanding how their employee experience drives their customer experience. And we have those clients. And if there are people out there who are curious, or we want to have a conversation, to your point, having a conversation that leads to us being able to work together, I welcome that. But simply like kind of punching against or yelling against the void of like amalgamous just noise and quote unquote backlash, I'm not only am I not interested in it, it just isn't a value add to like living corporate as a brand, to my personal well-being or my family. You know what I mean?
No, Zach, you're saying so much in a really compact statement that you just basically say, we ain't got no time for that. Like, if you're trying to run a business and you're spending a lot of time kind of belly aching or bad mouthing companies that decide to shift their diversity efforts, let them. You really don't know what's going on in the background. And usually a lot of this so-called backlash is one or two major investors that have a political beef.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with what DEI is and principally and practically.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with creating the conditions for everybody to thrive and for your organization to create value beyond the P&L. This has nothing to do with that. That's how I define inclusion. If you're not putting in the actions to create those conditions, it's not about whether you like DEI or not. It's that you're not really thinking very long term about what your organization's purpose to do.
You know, and to that end, I appreciate the entrepreneur, because I think this conversation is really helpful. First, it's helpful in a variety of ways, because we're touching on, DEI landscape, and we're also talking like the intersection between public health and fairness and equity in the workplace and beyond. But then, you know, there's something about, again, like your profile I find really interesting, Amri, very unique. You know, you're a Black man carrying an American context to the global work you do, right? Like you're in Switzerland, right? So I'm curious, first of all, why Switzerland? And then, I mean, now looking at Switzerland outside looking in, Switzerland looks super fire. So like, let me get a project with Amri so I can go to Switzerland. But
absolutely, we got to make it happen.
Don't threaten me with a good time. But here's what I'm trying to understand is certainly there's things that you have picked up both intentionally and unintentionally, helpful and unhelpful, on your career and your journey as an entrepreneur, as a Black male entrepreneur, again, working from an American context. Is there anything you've had to unlearn or kind of reset on as you've been in this work and as you've engaged different cultural contexts, especially internationally?
You know, I don't know if I had to unlearn it. I just had to expand it. Like when the dynamics of language here are very different than the dynamics of language in the US. You might deal with Spanish and English in the US for the most part. Some communities in certain states, you might deal with other language dynamics. But here, your language is always at play. So if I'm working in Switzerland, which I have clients that are here, in addition to clients in other parts of Europe and a good number in the US, language is always at play. And so I have to be thinking about, am I fully even being understood in the language that I know best? I do business in English, but there's times where somebody might not be following everything that I'm saying in English, and I need to do some sense making, some sense checking to make sure that this is translating. I do that a lot with my wife because she speaks everything, but she's not always there when I'm with a client. So she's never there when I'm with a client, actually. And so I have to make sure that I'm conveying what I'm trying to say very well. And so the message for us is always about creating the conditions for thriving, full stop. That's always the message. And what that looks like for various people in your organization that might be from another part of the world that are experiencing something different than those who might have the primary language or the primary culture. And so that happens here. We still, Eastern bloc of Europe has a different connotation for Swiss people, right? Even neighboring countries, we live right across the street from France and Germany. There's different connotations just from the neighbors. And actually, literally, we live across the street from France and Germany. And then, Italy also borders Switzerland. So you have, three major languages here, and then a fourth that's not as spoken, but the three major languages that people do business in: Swiss German, French, and Italian. And most businesses here are global. Like even the pharmaceutical companies that are relatively small, they're doing business all over the world. So their business language is English. So there's tension that just goes on for the cultural dynamics that enter in. So that's the thing I just had to do. I had to expand on language. I had an experience a few years ago. My niece, who I raised, so she's like my daughter. She came to live with me when she was 14. My brother died when she was 5. So she came to live with me in high school in Cambridge, inside of Boston, when she was 14. So imagine I was single at the time, a single man with a 14-year-old girl. And she was a 14-year-old girl, right? She was a teenage girl. And in 2022, I got a call where I got a text from my mother that she had a near tragic accident. And she ended up losing her right leg. And so I also began that journey about shaping and shifting identities, because that's the nature of identity. She's a mixed race girl. She was 22. She was in Boston. The only thing that was on my mind, Zach, was how discriminated against she would be. And it didn't happen. And so obviously that reframe didn't just happen because I was here, but it probably was at least accentuated by what I had been seeing, because the DEI landscape when I came out of Novartis was like foreign to me. I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why would these people are stakeholders that are going to determine budget? They're going to be your allies or not? What are you doing? Don't do that. And people thought I was crazy. Like, oh, you need to speak truth to power. I was like, yeah.
All right. So let's here we go. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
but but no, you speaking truth to power doesn't mean calling white dudes racist. They'll just go quiet. They won't even
talk
say
about
anything,
it. Let's talk about it.
So let me finish with my niece. So
my bad.
No,
Please.
we're going to talk about that. And so, in reflecting on that, I was like, you know what? What about it? And you know what my niece never did? We talked about this early. She goes, at first she was kind of whining. Of course, I was like, I can't even empathize with this kid. I can't do it. You got to teach me on this. And you know what she taught me? She ain't no victim. She gonna make it happen. And you know what she's doing now? She's a dental hygienist in Topeka, Kansas, about to go back to school so she can go to dental school.
That's awesome.
If she did not tell you she had a prosthetic, you would not know. And she doesn't tell people. And sometimes they find out and they're like, oh. And then she does not want anybody coddling her. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was any result of the way I raised her. I probably raised her more masculine than I did feminine. But she is just killing it. She's just making it happen. And so identity expanded for her. Another dimension that she talks about openly, when she wouldn't at first, but now she talks about it openly, how she's navigating it, all the way down to finding a shoe that fits over her prosthetic foot. So like those things, they didn't occur to me. So my similar to language, my lens expanded since I've been here because of her experience. And I think that lens expanding and morphing for people, I think we could do better at as DEI professionals beyond focusing on single identities, because I haven't found it to work.
And so first of all, thank you for telling me that incredible story about your niece, and I'm glad that she's doing well and thriving as she moves with her disability. I think what got me jump out there was, I think that the framing was just very, very odd. I saw so often in the DEI space, and I never got into that of
smart man
finger wagging the power brokers about how they're whatever, and not because I didn't necessarily. That's what's odd to me. It's like, hey, what is the vision and long game with this work, right? So. And it's interesting because, and I tell this to folks often. This is more about Black and brown, particularly Black DEI practitioners or employee experience or HR, anything people oriented, irrespective if we want to accept it or not. We're a part of an ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Black practitioners.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I tell people all the time that often there's an unspoken budget delineation with these organizations. So organizations have their quote unquote DEI budget, Amri. So they got this budget, okay? But then they got, okay, now I'm pausing for effect because I know people are going to be, they got the black budget now, okay? It's not all the same. So what do I mean by that? So organization A might have $1 million. Well, it's $1 million for DEI, but they're breaking it out. Hey, we're going to have Hispanic initiatives. We're going to have API initiatives. We're going to have queer initiatives. Now, again, there's a lack of intersectionality and thoughtful and strategic nuance there, but I'm speaking to the reality of how these things oftentimes really are broken out. And then there's a black allocation. And so what happens so often is they might say, okay, you know what? Out of this $1 million, we're going to spend $200,000 on this workshop with this black DEI company or this facilitator. They go and they have a 45-minute session or a half-a-day session of being told that they're white supremacists and participants and beneficiaries of the patriarchy and capitalists and dismantling this and dismantling that and completely counterintuitive to the capitalist context that we operate in America. And so guess what? That DEI firm or that facilitator, they get paid their $50,000. Amri, they get paid their $40-something thousand or they $100,000. But guess what happens? They don't get invited back. And the next year, that organization, if they don't all together reallocate the budget and give less, they're at the very least going to double check and be more hesitant of anybody else because we all are in the same space. We share the same air. And so it really pissed me off when I would see this because I'm like, hey, like, it seems like it's like you did that. Okay, cool. You called the chief operating officer a white supremacist. Okay. And you got to talk about it on LinkedIn. Okay. Now what? And selfishly, what about me, fam? Because I don't necessarily want to call the COO a white supremacist. And if I'm going to call the COO a white supremacist, I'm at least going to do it thoughtfully in a data-driven, quantifiable way and I'm going to pair it with solutions as to what they need to do to mitigate risk. Like it's going to at least be packaged in a way that is digestible. But I just don't, it frustrates me, man. Like this whole, I wrote about this earlier this year is, this, and I'm curious, especially like considering that you're operating in Switzerland, which is a completely different, like just like economic context and just like business is done differently over there. But in America, we're in a late stage capitalist society. So there's a certain level of, hey, this is capitalism. This is business. I just don't know if I fundamentally believe I disagree with any effort or labor that is finger wagging. It exposes marginalized employees to harm because you got these people that come into the organization and they don't have to deal with you every day. So they're going to call you this and that. But the black and brown folks who actually have to work there, the marginalized people have to work there, the women have to work there, the queer folks, the disabled folks, these people that operate in multiple spheres of identity simultaneously, they have to now deal with the fallout of this really destructive, frankly, work that you've done. And it's like, I struggle to see like the benefit from any dimension beyond you being able to say that you walked in and told the COO of Pepsi that they need to pay reparations. Like, I don't know. I mean, what am I missing?
You're not missing anything. What's that Bob Marley song? He says, now you get what you want. Do you want more? And that's how it occurs to me. Like you got that and you didn't think about the trade-offs in going in with that approach. And you didn't think about making this work accessible. Like, what does it mean to be accessible to an organization? One, you have to, this is a subtitle of Reconstructing Inclusion, making DEI accessible, actionable, and sustainable. Accessible means that everybody has to understand where they are in the dynamics of an interdependent ecosystem, as you used, of an organization, and how everything you do is signaling something, or every action you take is signaling something of a priority for the people. And how do you frame that if you're a DEI practitioner? The reality is, Zach, a lot of DEI practitioners that came on the scene in the past 5 years, you had like somebody like Audra Bohannon. She went in knowing that. She went in saying, here's where we're going. And this is what it's going to look like. She signposted it. And here's what is going to be expected of you. Here's what's going to be expected of all stakeholders. Yeah. And here's how you make this stick. How do you make it aligned with organizational purpose so it can be sustained? And so everybody understands that they have a role to play. Everybody understands that the priority has to be made very clearly. It can't be ambiguous. And very clearly, this is aligned with how business gets done and the outcomes that you want to see. Some of them are financial. Some of them are more intangible, that are harder to measure, but still measurable. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of people went in with that framing because they weren't trained for that. And so a lot of people got into this. They were like, they saw the bag. It was just hanging there. And they went and said, let me get it. And they got it.
I'll worry about the rest later.
Exactly, because this is not their space. Technically, it's not. If you care about something, you do it in a way that's at the highest levels because you want it to be sustained for several years. I use this analogy sometimes, Zach, from Amri Johnson. He wrote a book called The Living Company, and he uses this analogy of a puddle versus a river company. A puddle company is just worried about short-term profits. And you know the nature of a puddle is if it's not raining, it gets stagnant at some point and then it dries up. Rivers are dependent on the ecosystem. The river needs the rest of the area and the forest around it, and the forest needs the river, right? And so what we didn't do is think about the trade-offs of our actions, and then we got mad because people cut budgets. And I'm like, I mean, what do you expect? You have no results. You have nothing tangible to show. You don't have anybody doing anything but just complaining about what's not happening, but they cannot describe. And I have some clients that are still in this space, and they're pretty large. Well, there's still this and there's still that. I'm like, well, what do you want? Like, right. What do you want? And how are you working towards what you want instead of just talking about everything you don't? Because if you focus on what you don't want, Zach, you'll get it. That's the hard part that people don't say out loud. You keep focusing on what you don't want, it will emerge. It is simply the law of the universe. And so what do you want to create? Be clear about that. And then what does it look like? And you're not going to get it right the first time, but you're going to tell stories about how you're getting closer. And those stories about the way we do things around here are what culture is. And that's part of the game. And I don't think people I don't know. I just felt like people went in unprepared and then mad that they were unprepared and then blamed it on the white man. And I'm like, no, you can't. You need to hold the mirror up to yourself. And if you're not holding the mirror up to yourself, even if you got it right, if you're not holding the mirror up, even if you got it right, Zach, you're not doing the work. Because to me, it's just posturing.
So it's interesting you say that part too. And to be clear for those, in terms of bad faith practitioners, I'm not talking about only one group of people.
Exactly.
Right? I'm talking about folks across the board. Now, however, and I am not I'm not a Thomas Sowell disciple. To be clear, for those who know what I'm talking about. But there was this disconnected white liberal voice that I do believe really came into prominence in this space that actually did create harm for, I'm going to just say it straight up because it's Living Corporate Real Talk Tuesdays, for Black and brown practitioners like the Amris of the world and the Audra Bohannons of the world, Black folks who understand and recognize whiteness and how we have to navigate. Because now I did, to be clear, I'm a millennial, so I did see people that look like me go and really left in these, no pun intended, in these workshops. But I also saw folks that did not look like me doing way too much, right?
I mean, we don't have time to go into Robin DiAngelo, but that's another conversation.
This is hold on, let me drop some tea real quick, because that's where I was going. Amri, we podding. We are podding. Okay, watch this. So Living Corporate, this was back in 2020. we got connected. Actually, shout out to, I think it was Katie Mizrahi. Katie Mizrahi is the head. She's the chief of staff at SurveyMonkey.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe it was Katie Mizrahi who connected me to the LinkedIn Learning team. And so Katie connects with the LinkedIn Learning team, and they're like, "Hey, look, we want to license some of your podcasts, turn them into audio learning modules, blah, 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 blah." We got started, and it was like 7 to 10 modules that we were like that, or conversations. Okay. And so I looked at it, and they showed me what the revenue was going to be. And look, at the time, Amri, I just got my first child. I'm over here like, great, this is recurring revenue for living corporate. That's just passive.
Yeah.
You know, I ain't got to go sell it. I just know every month I'm gonna get this royalty.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
So then I want to say like a week later, something dropped on the news, and it was headlines everywhere. It was a major brand, and I'm not saying the brand. I can't remember what the brand was, but they got upset because the training that they were subjected to was about denying your whiteness and understanding that you're a colonizer. And it was a bunch of stuff like that. Right. And they were pointing to the fact that it was Robin DiAngelo's content. And what happened was somebody, she says without her permission, had worked with LinkedIn Learning to publish that content. So people were getting this content on LinkedIn Learning.
Wow.
Okay. So, and I'm not questioning who's telling the truth.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about what happened. So she said whatever. So, but this content, which was Dr. DiAngelo's content, was on LinkedIn Learning. So guess what? Because that content got driven to those people that way, and they were offended. Watch, you see where I'm about to go. LinkedIn Learning came back to me and said, "Hey, we were going to do this many modules. We were going to do 7 to 10. We're going to do like 3 now." Wow. Right. And so then, we expanded, and we ended up adding a couple more. I think right now we have like 7. Now I think we ultimately have like 7 courses on. But again, like, that was some bread. That was
absolutely.
That was bread that I missed out on purely because of somebody else's work and how they decided to frame, and however that other party decided to frame that work. So if it was a little whatever, they decided to make it, to add some more stuff on it. And so then when LinkedIn Learning came back to me, they said, "Hey, listen, we're now operating in this. We have a new policy where we're trying to operate in the middle. We don't want to offend anybody. And so now that we go back and we look at some of your conversations where you talk about racism or you talk about being Black at work, that now falls within." So, it reinforces this idea of just, again, we're in an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And DEI practitioners, people practitioners, HR practitioners, people in the space period, especially if you sit in a position of like racial privilege, like it's just critical that it's just the irony that you're not thinking about the disparate impacts of your own actions to other people in this ecosystem that do not share the same privileges as you. Because I wasn't Dr. Robert DiAngelo then, and I'm not Dr. Robin DiAngelo now. I ain't walking into a space commanding 80 bands for a speaker fee, right? For a speaking engagement. And look, this isn't a shade to no. This is what I love about this is, and here's some more tea for those who like want to check out our library. We've had Robin DiAngelo on the podcast.
Oh, word.
Yes, where we talked and I wasn't there because my daughter was literally being born.
Okay.
My first daughter was being born. but my host at one of my co-hosts, Amy C. Waninger, people listen to her content on here as well. She interviewed her, and one of the questions we asked was, "Hey, listen, a lot of the things that you talk about, and frankly, a lot of, I would say, white practitioners and even younger Black and brown practitioners that they talk, the DEI, what they've done is what they do often is they take a lot of Black and brown authorship and scholarship and they're really standing on those shoulders, but they oftentimes decontextualize or frame it in a way to make it more quote unquote provocative."
That's it.
which then not only creates harm for themselves, but it harms the legacy of the soldiers they're standing on, and it creates future harm for people coming after them.
That's
And I
good,
just
Zach.
I need us, when we talk about 2025, and this is my last question because I know we're coming up on time. As we get into 2025 and irrespective of the results in November, we're going to have to think more collectively than individualistically. It just has to happen. And I mean, I want to ask you, considering your own company and your work, Inclusion Wins, what are some things you believe executives should be keeping in mind heading into the selection and then out of this cycle going into 2025?
As it relates just generally or about DEI?
About, I love your framing about creating the conditions for.
I mean, I remember when the election results were coming in 2016, and I was at a retreat with the HR leadership team at Novartis. I had joined that team. We originally weren't in HR, and I eventually went into HR. And they were just upset and crying. And I kind of had a sense that he was going to win, but I didn't say it out loud because people got mad at me every time I did. And I said, look, I know you all are upset, but now we just have to work together more effectively. We need to learn and do what we need to do. I'm saying, worry, he's going to be president for X number of years, 4 or 8, right? He might not get reelected the next time, but now what do we need to do? He's the president. He's not the king. And now a lot of people have this belief that Trump's going to come in and dictate and everything. And I don't necessarily believe that. I don't necessarily like him, but I don't believe that he's going to do something that's kind of like batshit crazy either. I think he's still a, egomaniac, and he wants to have a legacy and he wants to live forever, right? At least in the minds of the people in a positive way, beyond just the people that support him right now. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think companies need to just think about their approaches to inclusion in ways that say, are we doing what we need to do to make sure our people are taken care of? Are we listening enough to not automatically dismiss them if we don't agree with their perspective, but to adopt a more heterodox view of this conversation, that we put some principles in mind and learn to those principles. Primarily, is this accessible to everybody? Are we prioritizing it unambiguously? What signals are we sending to do that? And how is this aligned with how business gets done? That people are able to have the capability and skills to do this wherever they are in the organization. One quote you've probably heard from Peter Senge is, leadership is the capacity of a human community to shape its future. We need everybody to be able to have the capability to shape the future of the organization. That leadership is a contact sport, as Marshall Goldsmith talks about, where we're actually creating more contact with each other rather than separation. So when you talked about the ERGs, I talk about this in Reconstructing Inclusion. I've never believed in single identity ERGs. Now, obviously, you can have a caucus. Like when I was at Novartis, we didn't have a Black ERG, but we certainly ate lunch together a lot. You know what I mean? I knew what was going on. I had a pulse of what was happening to a variety of communities that would pull me over, and we'd have these kind of informal chats. And then I'd say, get involved in this and get involved in this. That's not about a single identity, but it's about community. Create more relationships where you hadn't created them before. And then tell them about your embodied experience and talk about what we can do together, because it's not just you that's experiencing it. Now, if there are some specific things, you have to address it. But if everybody is having the conditions created, when we're off the mark, we'll know, because people will be willing to say, and they'll also be able to hold up the mirror before they start pointing fingers. And so I think leadership in organizations, senior leadership in organizations, needs to start thinking about the DEI space as a space to create anti-fragility, a space to create the ability to bounce back when something's hard and do better, like we weight train. your muscles get fatigued and torn down, and then you can bounce back and be stronger. That's the capacity that I think organizations need to build. And that's an everyone thing. Everybody needs to be building those skills and capabilities. And it will help the organization over time, because it's inevitable that you're going to have more challenges because the world is just moving too fast. And so to me, build the capabilities, build it on principles, make sure everybody understands how they can play a role. Certain people that are more influential have more responsibility to do that, and they need to learn how to do it. And build it for the long haul and not the puddle. Build it for the river and not the puddle. And I think the organizations that do that are going to last and have to create value in the world. I think that they're already moving in that direction, and others are seeing that that's the way, and they'll get on board. And if they don't, they'll have to deal with the consequences. And I think they'll eventually recognize that that's what they have to do. It doesn't matter who gets elected. We could say it's going to be better under one or the other, and we don't know, because how are we going to compare it if one wins and the other one doesn't, right? It's all going to be speculative. This wouldn't have happened under so and so. You don't know, and so I'm voting, and I'm voting on humanity more than I'm voting on presidents. And whoever I vote for, I'm going to keep doing my work and choosing humanity in my work every day. And hopefully my clients will buy into that, and we'll be able to keep choosing humanity together.
I love it. Look, it's been Amri Johnson. Man, I so thankful, and look, I'm tell you, I'll tell you on the mic, and then give the listeners a little bit of again, since we sharing additional context and background information. We get a lot of pitches to live in corporate, and very few of them make it through, right? Like we have a pretty long queue line. But not only was I excited when I saw you come through, and the opportunity to speak with you, but then I saw all the shared connections we had, and I'm so thankful that we're able to sit down and have this conversation. I really look forward to us keeping in touch, not only on this podcast, which certainly you're a friend of the show, you're welcome back anytime, but also I would look forward to us talking outside of the mic. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate you, Zach. I love the work you're doing, and keep it rolling, brother.
Thank you. Peace.
Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin from Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.